Hey, what's going on, guys? Biz here. Long time no see. So after taking a break, a much needed break at the end of 320, I played D4 beta. I have a lot of videos that I'm kind of behind on right now, but my family just came and visited me in Hawaii for the first time ever, so I took some time away from everything relating to the games and stuff for a little bit while my family was visiting. So I'm excited to get back into it. I have a bunch more videos that'll be coming out both before and after League start, revolving around both PoE, thoughts on the current game, thoughts on builds, thoughts on everything revolving around PoE, but also D4 as well. So if you are interested in that content, please do subscribe or feel free to follow along. Come back and check out the other videos. I will have a ton of videos being pushed out over the course of the next few weeks. That out of the way, this is going to be my first video for 321. As most people, this is probably their favorite time of the league for my content. These are the early PoBs. And we're starting out with something that the bait is so strong, I might even be baiting myself here. I legitimately think this is one of the best starters going into 321 for the new stuff. Obviously, Traps got nerfed pretty hard. Cold Dot's still really strong, and we even have new Ascendancies entering the arena. Pyro looks like it's going to be a pretty good caster Ascendancy now as well. So Cold Dot's, as healthy as ever. I actually think SRS is still really good. You still have fire-based hit SRS and stuff like that. And I think Poison SRS will still be perfectly viable as well. Absolution is getting randomly buffed when it was already a good skill. So there's tons of good starters already for safe things. However, there's a new thing here that was kind of like on the borderline of viability for a long time. It's something you could play, but wasn't super strong. And that's Reap. Now, I'm sure everybody at this point is aware that once you get a Woke Cascade, playing a hit-based Reap build can be very, very strong. However, it was never considered League start viable, especially as, an SSF player, especially in hardcore too, because of the ways that you need to scale the damage there. So, that being said, Vaal Reap is being added to the game and is one of the craziest skills we've seen in a really, really long time. So I'm going to break down what Vaal Reap is, how it relates to normal Reap, the way that I plan on playing it, and kind of how I want to go about building the character and everything. So I've already got my PoB ready for it, and we're just going to explain the skill a little bit first, and then we'll get into the actual build. So what is Reap? Reap is basically, in a lot of ways, better Exsanguinate. So in Ultimatum, when they added these skills, you had Exsanguinate and you had Reap, right? Exsanguinate was a really, really short dot, but it could be stacked up to 3 times, and each stack would do damage. Like have its own individual dot timer, kind of similar to Blight, but just way less stacks and less duration. And on paper, Exsanguinate would always deal more damage than Reap. What Reap does is it will put 1 dot on the enemy, but it will buff you, and the buff will go up to 4 or 5 times. And each time you gain this charge, it increases the life cost and the damage of Reap, both the hit portion and the dot portion, because it has 2 portions to the skill, right? Just like Exsanguinate. So, a max triple stack Exsanguinate would always in PoB like edge out DPS wise over Reap. The difference is Reap, it's very, very easy to just sustain a maximum blood charge Reap that does like 90% of the DPS of a 3 stack Exsanguinate. And in reality, when your Exsanguinate lasts like 1 second or 1.1 seconds, it's really, really, really hard, basically impossible to have 3 stacks up all the time. So over the course of like an actual boss fight, over the course of an actual encounter, Reap in practice would actually pull ahead of Exsanguinate in terms of actual DPS. So that's important to keep note of. Now, on top of that, we have Reap, the gym info, I guess, for Reap, and it's only a level 1 gym, but we can assume that this will apply to level 20 version as well, right? So let's look at the level 1 stats. We have a whatever, the life cost doesn't really matter, but we have 0.8% cast time, which is a little bit on the high side. We don't really care about the crit chance because we're not going hit based. And we don't really care about the effectiveness of added damage either. However, the effectiveness of the added damage is 210%. Now, the base damage of the hit portion of the skill is 57 to 86. And the damage over time is 120.2. fizz damage per second, right? And this is not an ailment, so you scale this with spell damage, area damage, all that generic stuff that normally wouldn't scale something like ignite, for example, right? Or poison. Now, the base duration of the dot is 1 second, but you don't have to worry about keeping up multiple stacks. And once you get a little bit of skill effect duration, you can sustain 100% uptime on this very, very comfortably. And so the way it works is you will get 15% more damage per blood charge, up to a maximum of 5. Now, there is a lab enchant you can get that will increase it to +1, and then you could get 6 in the base game. However, Reap is being added, and I really like what they're doing with some of these new Vaal skills they've been adding recently. Is back in the day, they made it, they changed the gym, so if you scaled duration, you also scaled the soul gain prevention, which is basically the cooldown timer on it, to prevent people from having permanent Vaal uptime on their skills. But what they've done recently is for skills that kind of are intended to have really, really high uptime, without bricking the interaction with skill effect duration, because a lot of builds want that anyway, they make the lockout timer and the duration of the buff or whatever the exact same. So if I have, for example, in Reap's case, I'll get into what that buff actually is in a second, but when I use Vaal Reap, I get a buff for 8 seconds. Well, the cooldown is also 8 seconds, which means that I'm going to have like 90 to 95% uptime on it, or even higher while mapping, because the soul count for Vaal Reap is so low that basically as soon as it falls off, it's literally ready to go again, which is really good. And then while bossing, you're just kind of capped by your DPS. You know, some bosses that heal and don't give souls back will have some awkward situations, but they've always had that with Vaal skills like Shaper and Cirrus. However, you're just kind of limited by your damage and the soul count gain that you get from hitting unique monsters. So you will have good uptime on this, even on bosses, most bosses without any ads even. And then if the boss does have ads or intermission phases or whatever, that's even better, because then you'll just have even better uptime on it, right? But the intention here is that you'll be able to have very, very, very high uptime on these skills. Vaal Smite was the same way. So if I scale the duration of my Vaal Reap buff from 8 seconds to 12 seconds, well, that's cool because the cooldown will scale from 8 seconds to 12 seconds as well. So they'll just scale linearly together. And then you won't have the cooldown like running away from you and then it not being worth it to scale skill effect duration, if that makes sense. So back to the numbers. 120.2 base physical damage per second with a base duration of 1 second. Now, what does Vaal Reap do? There's a lot here. So if you need to rewind the video after I go through this or whatever, if I explain too fast, I'm sorry, just try to keep up. So the effectiveness of added damage is 420%. You'll notice that is literally double base Reap. So it goes from 210 to 420. And then the damage here is 115 to 172 physical damage. So it's got double the damage effectiveness and double the flat damage. So Reap builds that scale hit base with Woke Cascade and all that stuff. They're going to love this. This is going to be a ton of extra damage, extra burst for them. And those builds were already good. They just required investment. Now, what about dot-based Reap, which has always been falling behind? Well, this is really cool because it does about 50% more base damage than Reap on the dot, right? So it does about 180 base damage versus 100 and 120, which is really, really good, right? So you get like a 50% damage increase on the dot. However, there's a lot more to this, right? The base duration of the dot itself is 5 seconds. It's 5 times longer than base Reap. Now, the very first question we have, and we won't know how this works until we're in it, and this build does a ton of damage no matter what. However, how much tons of damage it deals is going to be dependent on this interaction. So, we don't know how Vaal Reap's dot will interact with normal Reap's dot. Can I use Vaal Reap and then also upkeep my normal Reap dot? I don't know if it has 2 individual dot timers. It's not an ailment or anything like that, so you wouldn't think the strongest one is replaced. The worst case scenario is I use Vaal Reap, and then if I use normal Reap after it, it overwrites the strong dot. We don't know how that'll work, but it is potentially an extra 30 to 40% DPS if you can have both active at the same time. We have no idea about this. Maybe they'll answer it in one of the FAQs they're doing. If not, we'll just have to test it, you know, when the patch comes out. However, I believe the way Smite worked was that you could have both auras active at the same time. They both had their own individual aura, even though they were effectively the same thing for both Smite and Vaal Smite. So hopefully Reap and Vaal Reap have their own individual dot counters, just so things don't get a little bit awkward with like keeping up things like Corrupting Fever, where you need to hit frequently to keep the dot up. Because the duration on it is really nice, but if you would like overwrite it or something, if you use normal reap, it would make it a little bit awkward, I would say. Still a DPS gain to do it, but it would feel a little bit awkward as opposed to the alternatives. Anyway, from there, so we have a dot that does 50% more damage and lasts 5 times longer baseline. So this is going to scale way harder with skill effect duration. Keep that in mind. Because the base duration is so much higher, right? And then there's a secondary duration. And what does the secondary duration do? Well, it does a few things. Okay, the first thing is that it will grant you +4 to maximum blood charges, and it will also always grant you up to the maximum. So if I walk into a boss room in a map after not hitting some monsters, I use Vaal Reap, I'm instantly at 9 maximum blood charges. Now this does drastically increase the life cost of it, but that's not a big deal for us, and I'll explain why later. But it also mega increases your damage, even on your normal Reap. So after you use Vaal Reap, you'll get a huge burst of damage, whether you're hit-based or dot-based, and then you will get a steroid buff, just like with Vaal Smite, that will make your normal Reap, much stronger, very like empowered. All right, and you can have very close to 100% uptime on it while mapping, and very high uptime on it while bossing. Right. Now the other secondary portion of this skill, and why it's really strong on dot base, is because after you use Vaal Reap, you leave an area of boiling blood behind for a secondary duration, and it will deal the same amount of dot damage as Vaal Reap, to our understanding, right? So we get 50% increased damage on a dot that lasts 5 times longer, and then also a dot on the ground, effectively burning ground for Ignite, right? Like with Flame Surge, that also does that 50% more damage. So in our example here, if we have 3 million damage, just like roughly, we'll round up right here, right? If we have like 3 million DPS and we use Vaal Reap, then we're putting a dot on them. Like, we'll ignore skill effect duration and all that stuff right now. We get 5 seconds of 4.5 mil DPS, and then a dot on the ground that also does 4.5 mil DPS. So we go from 3 mil DPS on our normal Reap all the way up to 9 mil in a burst window that we can have relatively good uptime on. That's pretty crazy, right? Like, that is a lot of damage. Like, think about Vaal, Detonate, Dead Ignite. Like, these numbers are way above that. It's really crazy. These numbers are very high. So there's still more to the skill though. Something really cool, and I think they should actually add this to other things in the game. But the effects of boiling blood linger for 2 seconds. So if you throw this down and then the boss walks out of it, the dot effect on them will linger for a set amount of time. And again, this will scale with skill effect duration. So there's a lot of stuff here that has synergy with skill effect duration. We get a longer duration on our base Reap. We get longer duration on Corrupting Fever. We get longer duration on the Vaal Reap, which is like the big dot. We get longer duration on the maximum blood charges, which buffs all of our damage, including base Reap. We get more duration on the Boiling Blood ground effect, which is even more damage, and the linger effect once they leave it. So baseline, the secondary duration and the soul gain prevention is 8 seconds, right? However, the Boiling Blood effect, assuming they're in the pool the whole time, is 10 seconds, because baseline, it will last for 8 seconds, and then when it goes away or they leave it, it will linger for an additional 2. And like I said, we scale a bunch of skill effect duration to get these numbers up as high as we can. So in my actual build here, my Reap dot lasts for like 1.6, 1.7 seconds, and then Vaal Reap lasts for about 8 seconds, and then the secondary duration on these is about 12 seconds. And then the linger effect would be a little bit less than 4. So you can imagine how quickly this can like really scale to have crazy damage uptime, right? So this is Vaal Reap. The other small notable things we should go over. So soul gain prevention baseline is 8 seconds, and the souls per use is 25. Souls per use being 25 is quite low. That's a very, that's pretty generous, honestly. It's very easy to get that. As soon as you use Reap once while mapping, you will instantly fill this when it's not on cooldown. It does only store 1 use, but what else could you expect when this is like literally one of the strongest Vaal skills we've ever seen? And on top of that, soul gain prevention is 8 seconds. scaling skill effect duration will increase the cooldown on this, but it will also increase the uptime of everything else accordingly. Even all the way down to the maximum blood charge effect, which will buff our base reap. So there's no downsides to increasing the duration on it. Hopefully that explanation made sense. We're going to get into the actual build now. So how did I decide to build this? Well, you can tell first off that I decided that dot base looked like the way to go, especially in a league start scenario, right? Now, I am aware that the tree here is level 100. I think I might have accidentally clicked the node somewhere because it should only be level 99. We'll get to it when we get to it, I guess. But it is a rather high level tree. Normally I try to round out the builds at about 95. But I just kind of was like clicking nodes. I wanted to see where it could go, and then I can decide what I want to peel off at a later date, right? There's even like small like life nodes here you could drop to get it down to 95, no problem. Very comfortably. So there's a lot you can you know, mess with or, you know, finagle here. There's nodes all over that aren't mandatory at all for the build. Super easy to drop. So you'll notice first off, oh, I'm on the wrong node here. There we go. Even more life. You'll notice here first off that I am playing a Scion. I'm doing Ascendant. Now, anyone who's like been a part of my channel for a while will know that typically I have played a decent amount of Fizz-Dot in the past, and I would always play it on Scion. I think Ascendant is the best way to play it. And back in the day, you'd play it with Necro, but nowadays I think Raider's the way to go with it. The TLDR here is basically we get Slayer, we get Culling Strike, we get Overleech, we get 30% increased AoE, and we get Reflect Immunity. Now, obviously, the biggest thing here is we are opening up Overleech. Culling Strike is a good attack steroid, especially for bossing. It helps a lot. And then 30% increased AoE, well, that speaks for itself. That'll help a lot, especially when we're playing a build that is AoE based. From there, I took Path of the Duelist to start there. It just saves a few passive points, pathing over from the sides, but realistically, you don't get a lot of bang for your buck pathing through these locations. Both Raider and Duelist felt a little bit awkward with their placement. And then Raider offers a lot of really good stuff. We get 20% spell suppression for free, 10% move speed, onslaught while on full frenzy charges, and of course frenzy charges when you hit a rare or a unique enemy, which will give us 100% uptime on frenzies while bossing, and then free perma phasing. So Raider for Ascendant is very, very, very good. You get a lot of stuff from this node. It is definitely one of the best Scion Ascendancy nodes that you can get. So with that said, and that out of the way, why is this build super good and why I'm excited about it? Obviously, Vaal Reap is insane and the damage looks nuts, but there's some other things happening this patch that make this very, very attractive. Now, one of those things is the massive buffs to Leech. Now, I did do a variant that kind of revolved around mixing normal Leech with a bunch of life regen. In the end, it was just way stronger to just go with pure Leech. So the new Leech nodes are really, really overpowered. They're really, really good. I think you're going to see a lot of builds, whether they go for Vaal Pact or Overleech or not. I think you're going to see a lot of Leech related stuff slipping back into the meta as we progress into 321, because a lot of the stuff is very strong, and I have other videos to make on other really strong mechanics, like Strength of Blood from Lethal Pride. That was I have another variant of this PoB trying to utilize that tech as well. I've got a lot of stuff to say about this patch that I think there's a decent amount of things that are kind of going unnoticed that seem really strong to me personally. So we have Leech, Vaal Pact, very, very strong. Vitality Void, obviously just a bunch of Leech here. So I guess I'll go over like Leech and what's important about it. So Vitality Void, 15% maximum total life recovery per second from Leech. This is the stat you care about from Leech. You don't care about the percentage Leech's life. Obviously, we're not even an attack build, so we don't care about that. We don't really care about the increased total recovery per second either. That's not really that important of a stat. The most important thing is the maximum total recovery. That is the stat that you want to focus on when pathing and utilizing Leech, right? So the first Leech mastery we grab here is 25%. And this is a massively buff node compared to what it was before. This is 25% increased maximum total life, mana, and ES recovery per second from Leech. So prior to 321, this node was 3 separate nodes that they combined into one and then buffed it. So this used to be 3 separate nodes, 1 for life, 1 for mana, and 1 for ES, and they were all 20%. So they combined them all together and then increased it to 25%. You got an additional 5% there, which is crazy. So a lot of value there. And then the other Leech node we grab up here, the 2 travel nodes don't really mean anything, but Taste for Blood itself got buffed. This used to be 10%, now it is 20, so you get an additional 10% here for a 3-pointer. We already passed through here, and we get another Leech Mastery. And this Leech Mastery is crazy. This is going to have huge implications on how people play PoE and make builds in the future. You can take my word for this. 10% of Leech is instant, right? So 10% of your Leech is going to be instant. This is equivalent to just a really, really large amount of flat life gain on hit. Things that hit fast are going to be able to abuse this the most, but there's a lot of stuff that there's no reason to not take this. Because we even have a Q&A, frequently asked questions post regarding 321 from GGG, and they kind of outline a little bit of the mechanics behind Leech for what people are thinking. So like for one single hit of damage, you would hit 10% of it would be instant, and then 90% of it is being leached to you over time. However, instant leech does not affect the maximum total recovery rate at all, which this is the stat that we care about, remember. Instant leech does not affect that whatsoever. So as long as you're hitting hard enough and often enough, there is no downside to having instant leech anyway. So you see this 4.2k life leech over here. You don't subtract 10% of that, and that's my actual leech rate. It doesn't work like that at all. I get 10% of this instantly, and also this. It's very, very, very good. It's very strong. Hopefully I did that justice. Now, from there, just, you know, typical stuff. We path for life over here. This is literally just like life. And then charisma for mana reservation stuff. All the jewels you're going to see on the tree. We pick up a ton of jewel sockets. There's some things that are really important for scaling Fizz Dot in this game. It's one of those kind of archetypes that's a little bit sparse when it comes to supports and ways to scale it. However, jewels and clusters really go a long way to help that. So you're going to see a lot of jewels like this all over the tree. It's just life with Fizz Dot multi. This is not PoB padding whatsoever. It's 2 beneficial stats that are very, very common and very easy to get. Now, if you wanted a more trade oriented, or like if you're actually like trying to put time into the build and want to craft some jewels, you would want maximum life, Fizz Dot multi, and damage over time multiplier. You would want the double one. You can also get increased maximum life, Fizz Dot multi, area damage, maximum life, Fizz Dot multi, physical damage, whatever it is. But just adding in like a third stat is also not outside the realm of possibility. But the double multi damage over time multiplier ones are the best for sure. And then you get a ton of these. I just didn't want to fill every single jewel socket on this tree with them because I have like 5 or 6 of them, and I think that would be padding. So over here we grab the charge mastery. The small notables here, 2% chance to gain each charge on kill, and then overcharge itself is 8%. So in total it's 12% on kill to gain a charge. This effectively means we'll have permanent max frenzy, endurance, and power charges while mapping. We obviously don't care about power charges, but permanent frenzy and endurance charges is really nice. Now you may think, Fizz, wait a minute, why would you do that if you have the Raider Mastery? Well, the Raider Mastery is a 10% chance to gain a charge when you hit a rare unique enemy. You're not going to be hitting rare unique enemies like every single time you cast, and it's only 10%. So I have tested this before in other builds I've played. It is not a reliable way to upkeep frenzies while mapping, and I don't want to utilize Blood Rage in the build. So we grab the charge mastery. The charge mastery itself, we get endurance and frenzies on kill for free, and then they have 100% increased duration. This means even while bossing, my frenzy charges will never fall off, even if I get bad RNG, because they last for 20 seconds, which is an eternity. Now, on top of this, this mastery also, to jump into the items real quick, lets us put endurance charge gain every whatever seconds. We don't have to care what it rolls. And then we get maximum endurance charges all the time. We get endurance charges and sustained for free. They'll just always be there, and we don't have to think about it. Very efficient pathing here, considering we would already need a way to solve frenzies while mapping. This is very, very strong little cluster here that I have been abusing on a lot of builds lately. Definitely very strong. Moving on from there, we have reflexes. This is just evasion and more spell suppression. And then the new evasion mastery that they moved off spell suppression mastery is 15%. It's buffed by 3%. Chance to suppress spell damage if your helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating. Now we're going to be utilizing hybrid bases, so we get to grab this. Now it is important to note that this to me looked like a targeted nerf onto Bone Shatter Jug, because what Bone Shatter Jug would do is use evasion bases on the gloves, boots, and helmet, which is what you needed to get the old mastery bonus, which was 12%, and then just put on a glorious plate with like 3k plus armor and fizz damage reduction on it to also like really take advantage of Unbreakable. They changed that, so now you also need evasion on your chest piece as well if you want to get that spell suppression. But for people who didn't plan on doing that, it's just buffed and you get an additional 3% spell suppression, which is nice. From there, we grab Mage Bane. Obviously, this is more spell suppression. Between all of the spell suppression that we get and the Raider node, you get a ton of spell suppression for free, which makes it really easy to cap it via gear. From there, life. This is just profane chemistry. This is, this is whatever. This is just a life node. If you really wanted to, you could actually take recover 4% of life when you use a flask. This will be pretty good for mapping, and probably even bossing when people use the triple life blast tech. But this build has so much sustain that I didn't click it. I did click this if I pathed here on pretty much every other build I took because of how strong this single mastery is. But on this build, it just felt like overkill. And then here's some of that skill effect duration that I was talking so much about. You get 45% increase from these 3 passives, and then the mastery itself is 10% more. Pathing through here, why do we take Battle Rouse? Because the new mana mastery gives 12% global mana reservation efficiency of skills. So this is how you're going to get mana reservation efficiency now. Don't have to mess with specific masteries for specific auras anymore. And then Battle Rouse itself is just kind of whatever. It gives us some mana and damage recouped as mana. It does literally nothing for us. We're only there for the mastery. Now, the base pathing here, I decided to go out this way. We get a little bit of strength and life from this node. And then path down, just fizz damage, armor, fizz damage, strength, life, and then Iron Will. Obviously, this build has 245 strength, so we actually get a pretty decent chunk of damage for 1 passive point here. 5.3% is not bad at all. And then we path up into Veteran Soldier and Relentless. So Relentless is basically just some increased fizz damage. And then Veteran Soldier is actually some flat life and 20% fizz dot multi. We also gain access to the Fizz Mastery here, which is 40% increased physical damage with skills that cost life. This is really good damage increase for 1 passive point, so we click that. Now moving down, we just have another jewel socket here. So there is one of your jewels you will need, according to PoB, you will need a mana reservation efficiency roll. So you can get this in a lot of places. You could do a loathing craft on your helmet. You could just get it on one of your jewels. There's a few different things you could do to get a little bit of mana reservation. And I just put this in just to be sure, because without this, my mana reservation was at like 0% exactly. Which sometimes the way that ends up working out is PoB will say I have slightly less, and then I have like a little bit more int or whatever, and then I just barely edge out the mana cost. But just to be 100% safe, make sure you get 1 jewel with mana reservation efficiency on it. Or just get a slightly higher roll on your implicit on your helmet, which is mana reservation efficiency. This is the lowest one. So if you get 1% higher than this, you'll be fine. Because everything in the build is costs life. So you don't need to worry about mana costs at all. You can reserve all of it. Pathing up from there, Warrior's Blood, its strength, a bunch of really efficient nodes here next to Marauder Star that give life and armor. These nodes are very strong. Up in the Heart of the Warrior, which is just more life and strength. And then Born to Fight, which is strength and fizz damage. So just a damage node, effectively. Moving down through here, we have Prismatic Skin. We all know that's a max res is good. Spoiler alert. And then over into Soul of Steel. So Soul of Steel is still really, really strong and worth pathing for, in my opinion. It's tons and tons of armor. It's max res. And then because we're using hybrid vases, we get to double dip on this. And so we get 15% spell suppression from the evasion mastery and 1% max all res on the armor mastery, which puts us at 80% fire res and 79% cold and lightning res. And you do also get, this is actually one of the few times I've seen all maximum resistances instead of all maximum elemental resistances. So you'll get 1 chaos res as well. Though it's not super likely that people are going to be capping chaos res even in hardcore. The reason that it was very common in 320 is because of Eternal Damnation, but obviously with that being gone, people are going to care a lot less about getting capped. Now you're going to see, especially builds that have really strong leech or really, really strong regen, you're going to see people probably going back and hovering around that 30% mark. That seems to be the magic number for a lot of stuff in hardcore. Maybe people will be incentivized a little bit more to get a little bit of chaos res or invest 1 point here for reduced effect of withered, since they added that new mod where monsters will deal like increased chaos damage and apply wither to you. So maybe people will be a little bit pressed to get a little bit more chaos res than usual, or invest 1 passive point into a protection mastery. But aside from that, it's going to go back to not really being much of a concern. From there, we path our next R reservation node, Champion of the Cause, and Bannerman. Why are we taking Bannerman? Because it's 15% effective non-curse auras on enemies. Obviously, it's a pure fizz build, so we use Pride to scale damage. Pride is not a buff to us, it is a debuff to enemies, thus Bannerman gives us damage. Reservation Mastery here, 10% increased effect on us from our auras, always super strong. The other one that I've grabbed over here is 8% increased damage for each of your auras of your skills affecting you. A lot of really efficient nodes there. And then Bloodless here, just more life. And from the Mastery here, we grab plus 50 to maximum life. And then there's definitely something a little bit scuffed with the pathing. I made this PoB originally in the 320 tree, and then I hit convert, so it converted to the 321 tree. So it might have scuffed a few things a little bit, because I should have grabbed this here. This does not work. This passive right now does not work, this mastery. 15% increased maximum life if there's no life modifiers on your equipped body armor. But this mastery is incredibly strong. You will notice that I'm abusing the shit out of this in like every single build that I've been making. It's very, very good. And the mastery right now doesn't work, so I've just added it to the config here. 15% increased maximum life to simulate this. I'm not really sure what exactly I have 2 passive points going to right now, where I've lost them, but I'll figure it out. It's not really that big of a deal. Maybe taking 2 points away from here or something. It doesn't really matter. I can figure it out on my own time. Anyway, so moving into the cluster jewel setup, obviously before you grab this is now a level 82 tree. I might even path here instead before grabbing this. So you would have more or less, yeah, it's the same amount of passive points, and you get a little bit more life early on. And then from here, you can grab a little bit more life on the tree here. You can go for more fizz damage. There's a lot of other stuff you could do. There's easy pathing down this way for Cannibalistic Rite. There's a lot of damage over here. You'll notice it's 11.7%. It also gives you another life mastery. There's life and armor nodes here, and max res between Barbarism and Juggernaut if you want more life and stuff over there. You can't grab these nodes. These are all melee physical damage, so don't get baited into that. Aside from that, you'd probably just path up more right side if you were league starting this before you got your cluster jewel set up. You can go for more jewel sockets for Fizz.multi there. You could also just path straight up here. This is cast speed. These are generic fizz damage and damage over time. This is generic fizz damage as well, so there's damage here. Obviously, going up for blood siphon's always good. Trickery is also more generic damage. If you really wanted to, there's Will of Blades, which is just more strength and fizz damage. So there are other ways to path for more damage before you get your cluster jewels, and multiple avenues you can take to just focus on damage. There's also these nodes here that are just generic percent fizz damage. So you could path here, grab Blood Siphon, grab Trickery, and then just start taking these while you farm your clusters. Something like this, right? And then as soon as you get your cluster jewels, your passive points just become a little bit more efficient, right? So that's what I would do before clusters. Anyway, with clusters, I clicked too many things to start Control-Zing, so we gotta do it the long way. All right, so basically I just used a large cluster jewel with fizz damage. We go for Battle Hardened Furious Assault and Master the Fundamentals. Now, most of these aren't too important. Master Fundamentals is some free resistance and some fizz damage. It's not super important. I would say Hardcore, I care more about these other two. This is 25% fizz damage and cast and attack speed. This song's bugging out, so we're gonna go next. Sorry, Hugel theme. Anyway, Battle Hardened's really, really good for Hardcore. 30% increased evasion and armor rating, and we get 35% increased fizz damage. Now from there, I use 2 medium cluster jewels with increased fizz damage over time. And on both of them, I use Student of Decay and Flow of Life. Now, these are more hardcore oriented. You can always opt for more damage on basically all of these. But I wanted to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. I wanted life and damage, hence Flow of Life. And then Student of Decay just eases gearing pressure so I can gear more aggressively, right? So Student of Decay is 26% chaos res between the 2 of them and 50% increased damage over time. And then obviously we get a open jewel socket on both of these, which we again put in life and fizz.multi into those. And again, you can always get better jewels. You could also go for, if you wanted to, I tested this out, replacing one of these with a small cluster jewel with mana reservation efficiency, and going for mana reservation efficiency on one of your main auras, and probably a 2 to 3 passive one. And that will actually allow you to fit Maim into the build, linked with Flesh and Stone, which will give you like a 17 or 18% damage increase. Though obviously you will need to reduce the amount of passives you've spent elsewhere on the tree. If you're playing softcore or something, you could easily just take the points out of Revenge of the Hunted. This character is insanely tanky. You could just take the points out of that or the points out of Profane Chemistry and use those points to fit in that extra aura for a really, really hefty damage boost. So you do have options there. Now that's basically the entire tree. Something else you could do that I was playing around with is going for area of effect and scaling more area of effect through the cluster jewels as well, trying to get damage and AoE at the same time instead of damage and survivability. Something that you may want to play around with if you're playing software again, or just you know, calculated risk if you want to play in hardcore, right? So that's the basic crux of the tree. So you'll notice here our DPS is a little bit shy right now of 3 million before we get into the gear. That's including obviously our pull DPS as well. While bossing, it is set to bosses. Now, what do we have on the config? All we have on the config is +4 to maximum blood charges to emulate our Reap buff, our Vaal Reap buff. And then we have Pride set to maximum effect. This is very, very easy to upkeep maximum effect on, especially once you quality your Pride, because qualitying your Pride is important. You get extra AoE on it, which for most auras doesn't matter, especially in SSF and solo play. But for Pride, it definitely does matter. You want to get the extra AoE, and it is huge. We also get, I believe we get some AoE on our auras from here. Yeah, we do get AoE from Bannerman as well. So if you guys are curious, I will show you. This is the radius of your Pride. So it's very easy to keep 100% uptime on this. It's basically the entire boss arena. So it's really, really easy to just upkeep the maximum effective Pride while bossing. Obviously, we're leeching. We have Overleech. Have you killed recently? This is just for the AoE radius here, so I could see what the radius would be while mapping. This doesn't affect our damage at all. Arcane Surge, I guess this was an accidental click. I think I was testing whether or not it was worth it to try to fit a little bit of mana cost somewhere into the build to proc Arcane Surge, so I could use Arcane Surge on my main links because the skill gem was getting buffed, and Reap is one of those that kind of struggles to find its 6th link comfortably. But you can see here, it really doesn't change our DPS at all. The DPS change here is due to the cast speed increase, which is kind of whatever. I mean, I guess I padded my leech rate by 8 life. And then Onslaught, this doesn't really do anything for us. Me checking and unchecking this, because we use frenzy charges, and obviously we'll have 100% uptime on this. So PoB overrides this check mark, and it will just permanently check this as long as we have frenzy charges up. See, now it'll change it. But even this doesn't really affect the DPS that much. But you will have 100% uptime on this while bossing. And then we just have frenzy charges and endurance charges checked, which, yeah, we're going to have 100% uptime on both of them. Because we have, again, 20 second frenzy charges and endurance charges due to the charge mastery. And we get frenzy charges on hit from Raider Ascendancy. And then our body implicit is endurance charge gain every whatever seconds, which, even if you get the lowest rolled one, is still less than every 20 seconds. So you'll 100% sustain max uptime on both of them. Right. So no padding, no shenanigans going on here. The plus 1000 to all resistances, I typically just add this in when I'm PoBing stuff. So I don't have to mess with actually adding in resistance on all my gear. Just when you look at the PoB, if you see an item that has like, you know, like it just has like life on it and then a bench craft, well, obviously you don't want literally just life and then a bench craft. Those extra slots are always open to fit in the resistance that I add in the config. Keep that in mind, because I get questions about that a lot. That is the tree. That's kind of a breakdown of the config. So no silly stuff going on here. It is set to bosses and everything. And the 15% maximum life, once again, is just because the mastery, the life mastery right now is broken. It does not work. That's everything. So let's take a look over on the left side here. The Reap by itself, while being buffed, is a little bit shy of 3 million DPS. Now without it, it's about 2.3 mil DPS. Very, very respectable damage over time numbers. Now obviously Vaal Reap is a massive portion of our damage, and we can't really put that into PoB yet because the full gym info hasn't been released. So once we get the info for that, I'm sure they'll update PoB super fast and we'll be able to plug it into the PoB, but until then we can't. So I just have to tell you, basically, when I use Vaal Reap, I get like just over 8 seconds. And you can see here if you're wondering how I'm getting these numbers, so you can go down to Reap, and if you look at your skill, your duration mod, basically we know that the base duration of Reap, Vaal Reap, excuse me, is 5 seconds. So we'll just multiply Vaal Reap's base duration by our duration modifier due to all of our skill effect duration, which means we get 8.044 seconds, right? Now, likewise, if we have a 2-second linger times I'm just going to do times 1.6. Then we have 3.2 seconds on the linger on the dot effect, the burning ground effect. And the 8 seconds for both the soul lockout and the buff that we get, we multiply this by 1.6 and we get 12.8. So it'll have just roughly a 13-second lockout and a 13-second long buff that will buff our normal Reap damage. And this is the duration of the pools that it will leave on the ground as well, because that is baseline 8 seconds. So the pools will be left on the ground for 8 seconds, and then once the boss leaves the pool, it will linger for an additional 3.2, which if you get high uptime on this, the maximum uptime would be 16 seconds of this crazy ass dot, which is super good. It's super, super, super good. And then the base duration of Vaal Reap's dot by itself is 8 seconds. So there's a lot of damage that you're getting from Vaal Reap, because once again, the pool that it puts on the ground and the dot by itself is about 50% more than base Reap. So in this instance, it would be a little bit shy of 4.5 mil DPS from both sources, which should be stacking their damage. And then how crazy it is depends on whether one of 3 scenarios. Reap, you can still hit with normal Reap, but it doesn't overwrite the dot, and they code it similar to how ailments work. The second one, which is the worst one because it would make the build feel kind of weird and shit to play, is if you use Vaal Reap, and then if you use a normal Reap, it overwrites the stronger dot. That would feel really, really bad for multiple reasons. Obviously, you're losing a ton of damage by overwriting the dot. You still have the ground effect as well, but you'd be overwriting the strong dot. And then it would also feel bad because it would mean that when you use Vaal Reap, you can't use normal Reap for a while, which means your Corrupting Fever would fall off and you would lose DPS from that. Now, it'd still be a massive, massive DPS game, but it just wouldn't, it would feel like counterintuitive, right? And then the third thing, which is the most preferable one, is it works like Vaal Smite or whatever, and they just have their own individual dot timers. So we use Vaal Reap, we get that crazy burning ground effect, we get the crazy Vaal Reap dot, and then we can still use normal Reap and we still get that dot as well. That means that we have on this PoB burst DPS of like 8 to 10 seconds over like 13 million, which on an HCSSF character that is this tanky is absolutely bonkers insane. Like top of the meta, this is like broken type stuff. Okay, so what are the defenses on this build? Well, obviously we get we get max spell suppression. Aside from that, we have Overleech, which is really strong. You'll notice with all the buffs to Leech and the addition of instant Leech means that we are leeching for 4.2k life a second. That is so much. That's like 60 something percent of our life a second that we're leeching. So aside from that, we're also healing 10% of our leech every time, assuming we're hitting that cap there. Assuming we're hitting that cap there, that 10%, basically, the life cost here, you don't need to worry about the life cost per second. You can ignore this. Don't be too scared of this. What we care about is the life cost per cast, which is about 680. Now, if we're healing roughly 400-ish, like 400 to 450-ish, maybe a little bit less, depending on the damage of the roll, you're basically subtracting that from this life cost. So in reality, the life cost per cast is going to be about 180, like 180 to 250 or whatever, which is completely negligible when you're leeching for this much life a second. In fact, the leech was so insane that I went ahead and just plugged RF into the build because I was like, hey, you know what's cool? 30% more damage. That's pretty cool. So I had the extra socket. I chucked it in there. And so even degenning 1,000 life a second, we're still leeching over 3k life per second. We're leeching over 50% of our maximum life a second. At this point, the leech is so insane, it doesn't really matter if we lose 1k there. The only way you die in this scenario while your leech is up is if you get one-shotted. Doesn't really matter if you're leeching 50 or 65% of your life per second. Nothing is going to deal enough damage to get through that, because you also have the insta-leech coming through as well. Because this leech is so insane, the insta-leech will basically more or less cancel out the life cost of Reap. Who cares, like, you take like 1 to 200 damage or whatever whenever you cast it, because you're leeching 3,000 life a second, like, you won't even see your HP bar move, right? So it's really tanky in that sense. Where's all this armor coming from? Well, basically, we get a lot of armor and stuff on the tree. We get Path of the Warrior, which is a lot of armor. We get stuff on the Marauder side, which is Soul of Steel. This is flat armor and percent increase armor. We get a lot of aura effect for more effective determination. We get Battle Harden, which is more armor. And then we grab the nodes over here by Marauder Start, which is more armor. So we have a lot of sources that increase armor. And then on top of that, I'm actually using a Dawnbreaker in the build, which comes with a shit ton of armor. Now, if you want to see the config here, it's just a slightly above average roll on the percent armor. It can get way more insane than this. You can get an additional 1,000 armor on this. And aside from that, it's not even 30 qualled. So if you went into a Katarina, it would take 2 seconds to do this. Then you get even more armor. And you'll notice it gets even better. So there's definitely these shields are so common. It's like the most common drop off Exarch in my experience. I farmed 1 million of these playing the Pathfinder Doom Blast in my private league in 320. Same thing. These are super easy to farm, super easy to get. You could be rocking one of these even in SSF by like day 2-3, no problem. Even if you're not a super fast player. And then you also get the bonus effect of getting a bunch of Fizz taken as fire, which increases your max Fizz, which is like Fizz damage is like the hardest thing to mitigate in this game because it defensively works inversely, as opposed to how other defensives work. Basically, the more damage you're taking, the less effective it is. So you want to try to get as much Fizz DR as you can everywhere else. So Fizz conversion into elemental damage is one of the best ways to do that. That's why endurance charges are so good in hardcore, right? But you also get a shit ton of block chance for free, which is pretty cool. I mean, we obviously don't itemize for block chance or anything, but just throwing the shield on and getting a fat chunk of it is, you know, it's not bad at all. Like, it'll just help while mapping. You'll run around and you'll just have 46% block chance a good amount of the time. You take a few hits, it'll go down and it'll just mitigate some damage for you. Just a little defensive layer that helps. It's not the biggest reason, or one of the reasons at all, really, that I'm using the shield. I'm just using the shield for the Fizz take and his fire, and the raw amount of armor that it gives is so much. You could replace this with a rare if you really wanted to, or maybe some other shield. You do have options here. This is one of the most flexible slots for sure. Now, what are we doing with the weapon? I want you guys to understand that this weapon is garbage. I used a terrible base. Implicits for wands can go all the way up to 42% increased spell damage. I grabbed one with 24%. I just wanted a low int requirement. And then how did we get the wand? This wand is terrible. You can get a wand that deals double the damage of this wand, no problem. All this wand is vendor recipeing a +1 to physical skill gem. If you don't know what the vendor recipe is, it is 40% total gem quality being vendored with a normal unrolled wand to a vendor. So like you have like 2 gems with a physical tag and they're both 20% quality. Plus a wand, they'll give you +1 Fizz. It's super, super easy vendor recipe to do. You could do this day 2 or 3 of the league, no problem. And then I just multi-mod spell damage and Fizz.multi. That's how you get this wand. Super brain dead. I just wanted a like rough estimate of like what DPS could look like with like bare minimums. And this is, yeah, this wand is nothing crazy. You could get something that offers much, much more damage than this. Now moving on to the helmet. Basically we roll just a pig face bassinet for life and some spell suppress, and then we bench craft on Fizz taking his fire to increase our Fizz mitigation. But you do have options there. You can also just try to roll a loathing helmet early on before you get your implicit for mana reservation efficiency. A lot of this isn't too important. Before you get this mana reservation efficiency, you can just not use War Banner. It's a 10% aura, and you'll be able to fit everything else in fine with just the tree. So this you'd be basically, one of the first things you're going to want to do if you're playing this in a league start scenario is get that extra little bit of mana reservation to fit in War Banner. So you get that like 10 to 11% damage increase. But yeah, super easy to craft here. And then all these open suffixes that you have, you would just want to put in resistances wherever you can. This applies to every piece of gear I'm about to go over. So just keep that in mind so I don't have to repeat myself every time. Aside from that, I have vulnerability curse effect on the Exarch implicit. There's a lot of other things you could put there. You could put max res or whatever. You know, do whatever you want. I'm not your mom. I just put a little bit of vuln curse effect on it. Now the chest piece, this is the next important one. I have endurance charge gain. This is how you're sustaining this in addition to the charge mastery, like I said earlier. Now, pride aura effect, you could replace this with determination aura effect if you wanted to be even more defensive and have even more armor. But I just decided to throw pride in there for more damage. Solid 5% damage increase. Now the item itself may look a little bit weird. Basically, I need a prefix, so I went for armor and evasion increase. And this is what I was talking about with that one node being really OP. Now, this is like a band-aid to crafting in a way. I've been pretty vocal on my stream and on YouTube about the state of crafting being really depressing, especially in SSF. It feels terrible, to be honest. But this is a cute little band-aid that will help with that. Now you can just roll the chest piece for spell suppression, and you don't have to care about any other mod. You can literally only care about spell suppression. You don't need to worry about getting a good life roll or an open prefix or whatever. You just put on spell suppression and off to the races. You're good to go. So what I'm looking at for an end game, and if you don't know why, it's because of the life mastery that gives you 15% max life if your chest piece doesn't have life on it. Well, this mastery basically means you get to forego life on your chest piece and still get it, effectively, a good life roll for 1 passive point. And it's absolutely worth it in most cases, right? So it makes crafting a lot easier for these chest pieces, because all I have to do is get spell suppression. At a baseline level, I'm good, and then I can scale it from there. So the scaling from there, get spell suppression roll, and this is not a crazy, this is like tier 3 or tier 2 or whatever. It's nothing crazy on the chest piece. and then roll it with flat percent PDR. That helps a lot with fizz mitigation, like I said. So we roll it for fizz damage reduction, and then from there, what you would do is your benchcraft would be probably fizz taken as fire and lightning, and this would be your benchcraft, and this increases your fizz max hit even more. But I left it open just in case. This would be like kind of the end result that would be desirable, but I left the benchcraft open just to emulate, like, hey, it's not super mandatory. You get this. The character's already insanely tanky. If you need to use the chest piece to fill resistances and stuff, you can absolutely use your benchcraft to do that. Moving on to the gloves. So this is the one slot that's important and will require a little bit of finagling. So I got spell suppression in other sockets and left the gloves open. That's because we want to use delirium crafting, which is one of the elevated essences that you get from using a remnant of corruption on one of the meds essences. If you don't know what the meds essences are, those are the purple essences: misery, envy, dread, and scorn, if I recall correctly. And those are all the purple ones. That's an easier thing to remember. Use a remnant of corruption on those. They have a chance to elevate into like the hysteria, the delirium, you know, all that garbage. And we want delirium gloves, if I recall correctly, and that will give us socketed gems deal 30% more damage over time. This is for our corrupting fever, so we can have a pseudo 5 link on it in our gloves. The gloves are a very, very important slot in this build because we can get like I said, the deli crafted gloves. So all you'll really want to do here is deli craft some gloves with some life on them, and then bench craft on damage while leeching. Damage while leeching is insane on builds that have Overleech because it's just a really, really strong, you get damage all the time, basically. And then the implicits are really important here. This fizz damage leech as life is how you're going to be leeching. This is where you need to get your fizz damage leech as life. Now, there are other ways to get this. You can get a elder or a hunter influence amulet, I believe, and both of those can roll fizz damage leech as well. So there are other avenues to get it. But this is going to be like endgame. This is how you're going to want to get it, more or less. And then if you can get higher levels of this, it'll help because it is a dot-based build, and we do scale a lot of generic physical damage. But just getting more of it will help you hit your leech cap faster and less hits. And then obviously fizz dot multi taking up the other slot. Early game, you can go for spell suppression if you need it to cap it off early, but you'll definitely want to swap over to fizz dot multi at some point. Very important slot here for sure. Moving down from here, these are the boots. So on the implicits for here, we just put in action speed and cooldown recovery rate of travel skills. You can kind of do whatever you want on the eater implicit. It's not super important. And then on the boots themselves, it's just life and movement speed, benchcraft with chill avoid. So these are super open. If you need more spell suppression, throw it here. If you need more resistances, throw it here. This is a super open slot where I'm going to be getting a lot of my resistances from. Now from there, we have a Lapis Amulet. This is just life with +1 to Fizz. This is super easy to get. Again, I leave a bunch of this stuff open. This is a League Start PoB. These are things that should be relatively easy to craft. So we just have life and physical gems, and then I have attribute catalysts on here with Hematophagy Anointed. Now there's a million good anoints for this build. I just did it for even more Leech. Not necessary. If you want, you can just go into the PoB when you grab the link, sort it by full DPS, and then pick whatever one looks fun to you. Moving down, we just have 2 Vermilion rings here. So on one of them, it's essence crafted with an int essence with attribute modifier on it. Just to get some attribute stuff out of the way with the high int requirements. I'm pretty sure the int requirement on this is due to, yeah, it's due to Flame Dash. I forgot to change it when I changed out the gems. So you actually do meet the attribute requirements with this stuff. And then in the other ring, this one, I have resistance catalysts on it. And then this Vermilion ring is just life with, you know, like, a good chaos res roll and then a hybrid chaos res roll. I just did this to emulate. This is probably where you're going to want to get a decent amount of your chaos res. And then, you know, as always, resistances wherever you fit them. And then the belt, I left this open as well, again, with resistance catalysts on that as well. So all I did was roll life, chaos res. that's pretty much it. Chaos res via an essence, I believe. And then you'll just hit it until you get other good stats. There's plenty of things you can do. I left a ton of room in all the mods here. None of this is padded whatsoever. You guys know how I am at this point. All these things are open. This is where you're going to be filling in your resistances. The Murderous Eye Jewel, all I did was put in life and int, just in case you don't get a catalyst or whatever, or, you know, just before you get your catalyst or whatever, and you know, find like a really good one that has high int requirement or whatever. Here you go, just life and int. This is brain dead easy to get. It would take a few harvest rolls and you're good. Moving on to the flask, basically more or less the same of stuff I always run. We have a divine flask that removes bleed and instant charge on hit, which is going to be on every single one of these. They all say flagellants. Obviously 3 charges on hit is the best, but if you get 1 or 2, that's fine as well. It just helps for more uptime. And then obviously you're going to want to catalyst all of your utility, or not catalyst, instilling orb, benchcraft all of your utility flasks with use on full to automate it while mapping and have good uptime. So on our granite, we have 35% additional elemental resistances during effect. This helps for the cracked curse and exposure combo that they added last league. This will keep you still overcapped on resistances while mapping. Jade, we have increased armor during flask effect. The Quicksilver, we have reduced effect of shock. And then I'm using a bismuth flask actually with reduced effect of curses. But there's a lot of stuff you could do here. You could do increased cast speed. You could add all sorts of other, there's a lot of good mods, to be honest. And why bismuth? Well, I figured you can put whatever you want here. You can use a sulfur if you want extra damage while mapping. You can use a basalt flask for extra armor while mapping. You can use bismuth for, again, even easier. Like if you're like right at 75%, a bismuth and additional elemental resistances during flask effect, you would be able to map at 75% res. And even if you get hit with a strong curse and a strong exposure, you would still be mega overcapped. So nothing really to worry about that. This last flask is kind of like just preference. If you want to use some type of unique flask, you actually have room for it in this build, just because Raider already gives you phasing for free, and I'm not too pressed on anything else specifically. So if you wanted to throw in like Dying Sun or you know, whatever, just get more AoE, more damage from sulfur, like I said, you could feel free to do that. And then probably while bossing, you would put your writhing jar in this, since you obviously don't need the effect of this while bossing. And you should be changing out your flask for bossing, especially if you're playing hardcore. But that's probably where your writhing jar would go to keep your leech up during downtime or boss and bones. So as you can see, the gear, all the equipment on this character is very, very, very modest. None of it's like padding. Like, look at this belt, man. You know, look at this. Look at the wand. Like, it's so simple. And then we already went over the jewels. Everything in the build quite simple. I hope I did the build justice. This is very, very strong contender to be my league starter. It will start strong. It has good scalability. It should have a very, very smooth power curve. And Vaal Reap looks absolutely insane. So yeah, this is one I think you're gonna see a lot of people probably playing Vaal Reap this league or trying it out. At some point, this skill may become super meta, especially with some of the other more meta stuff being nerfed. It's looking crazy. It's looking super, super crazy right now. Normally I add really big disclaimers on these early league start PoBs, because it is just like this is the stuff they added. I wanted to do some fun stuff with it. This is what I got, right? That's normally what these videos are, but this build looks to be very, very strong. Now, the actual links themselves, we have Reap here with Brutality, Swift Affliction, Efficacy, Cruelty, Control Destruction, and Cruelty while mapping. And then for bossing, you have a few different options. You can use Cruelty, but with reduced effect, because you're not going to be hitting max effect Cruelty on a boss. Because Cruelty effect is based off ailment threshold. You're not hitting for like 2 million damage to get max effect Cruelty, right? So from there, you can use concentrated effect early on if you don't want to go for Cruelty, but Cruelty, even at like half value, may end up being better than concentrated effect. There is also life cap as well, though I'm not sure. There we go. I'm not sure like how much better this would be. It says it's slightly better than concentrated effect, so maybe you go for life tap instead of conk effect or whatever. But all in all, cruelty may still be your best option for bossing. Once you get empower though, you're probably going to want to swap over to that. A level 3 empower is as you can see here, it's like what, like 8% less DPS, almost exactly 8% less damage than a max effect cruelty, but you're not going to be getting a max effect cruelty like does it not let me wait, I gotta check it, hold on. We go in here, like let's say it's a half. If it's a half effect cruelty, yeah, then it's only 15%. Then it's about even with life tap, and empower starts to pull ahead. But there are some bosses where this could be, you know, it could be as low as like 15% or whatever. So once you get an empower, you're probably going to want to swap over to it for bossing. And then if you get lucky and you hit the level 4, then it just becomes better. Then it just becomes better than cruelty all the time, no matter what. It just barely edges out ahead of it. So if you're playing in trade, definitely aim for the level 4 empower. That's the play for you. League start, this is going to be your 6-link setup though. And yeah, that's everything on that. Moving on from there, we have our helmet with our aura setup. We have Pride, Determination, War Banner, and Malevolence. Like I said originally, the easiest thing to drop here to fit stuff in is War Banner. So before you get that helmet implicit that has reservation or a loathing helmet or whatever, you can just drop War Banner. As soon as you are able to fit that in, you get a really nice damage boost to the build. But early game, you're definitely going to want to be focusing on Malevolence, Determination, and Pride. And as always, if you really... Oh no. It broke. All right. As always, if you really wanted to, what you could do with your auras over here, oh, it rolled me back, is use Defiance Banner instead if you don't care about the damage, or if you drop a bunch of life on the tree or a bunch of survivability on the tree and grab more damage from there, and you're like, I don't really feel like I need War Banner, then you could just, oh, every time I click it breaks. Okay, well, then you can fit Defiance Banner in instead. Moving down from there, we have Vulnerability. That's our curse. Now I'm using Anomalous for increased effect of the curse. That's pretty much it. And then we have Flame Dash, and both of them are linked to Life Tap. This is going to be in our shield. And then on our gloves, you may see this and think like, what the hell, dude? Basically, my count multiplier was not increasing, as you can see the DPS readout for Corrupting Fever, so I had to manually add 9 more of them to get an idea of what the DPS would be like when it's full stack. Now what you can do to make clearing feel better, so this will be the AoE baseline of Reap without getting any increased AoE on your equipment, which you can definitely do, or anointing AoE, like a node that gives AoE and damage, or changing out one of the clusters or multiple of the clusters for AoE. I saw a few things, or maybe if you're in trade, you want to use Intensify or Woke AoE or something like that while mapping. You can get the radius of this up to like 37 with a little bit of investment. And if you full invest in AoE, you could probably pass 40-ish, which isn't bad, especially because when you use Vaal Reap, it's basically like using it with Spell Cascade, with a Woke Spell Cascade. It summons 3 clones that all do a big Reap outwards, so it's pretty screen wide even without AoE investment. So when you do use Vaal Reap, it'll hit most of the screen anyway, and then it will leave like a prolif dot on the ground, so if anything walks over it, they'll instantly die. However, if you want to zoom, like super zoom, like the Reap will be fine by itself, but if you want to zoom, you can basically, you have 2 options. You can drop one of your supports here while mapping, Cruelty, Efficacy, Swift Affliction, Control, Destruction, Brutality, whatever it may be. You can drop one of your supports here, and then run a Exsanguinate instead. Or you can take Corrupting Fever out of your gloves and use your Exsanguinate on a pseudo 5-link, because your Corrupting Fever is getting the Deli Glove treatment with 30% more damage over time. So you could, while mapping, you could drop Corrupting Fever out of your gloves and put in Exsanguinate and then replace Swift Affliction with Chain or whatever if you wanted even better clear. And then anytime you come across like a tanky monster, like an Essence monster or the map boss or whatever, you still have your 6-link Reap, and your Vaal Reap, which will just instantly melt anything, even in T16s. So that should be a really, really smooth clearing setup that you can do. And then just swap Corrupting Fever back in whenever you're ready to boss. That seems like the most optimal thing, but you can also go for the double 5-link setup as well if you want to keep your Corrupting Fever. And then in our main hand, we just have Shield Charge, faster attacks with Life Tap. And then in our boots, we have our Caster Damage Shaken Molten Shell setup, also linked to Life Tap, and then Righteous Fire. I'm using Divergent Righteous Fire because it gives 20% increased spell damage at 20 quality. Now, the difference between Divergent level 20 Righteous Fire and a level 21 normal Righteous Fire is they're like basically the same. This is like 0.2% more damage or whatever. So just you don't need the alt quals on these. These are just like very, very, very tiny damage increases. But yeah, if you're super scared or whatever, or if you're entering like Exarch Ball phase or something, you can always just, you know, literally just turn Righteous Fire off in the boss arena, and then your Leech goes up a ton, right? Your Leech goes whatever it rolled back here. This was like 4.2k. So your Leech would go from like 3.1k to 4.2k. So yeah, you can just turn this off whenever you need to. Just get a flask rolled with burn removal while bossing, or maybe if you want to map with that, but that would brick whatever flask you have. It shouldn't be a problem. Why Overleech is so good. You can go a long time and not start degenning. But yeah, if you don't want to use RF in the build, you absolutely do not need to. I just figured like the Leech numbers were so over the top, so overkill, that I was like, I might as well put it in and get like 30% increased damage for free. So that's basically everything. You're probably going to see a lot of people doing Reap builds, a lot of content creators doing this, because the numbers on it are absolutely wonky. It looks ridiculous. I have a ton of other builds that I've done. I have a ton of thoughts and opinions and think pieces and all sorts of stuff I'd love to talk about. If there's anything specific, I still have D4 that I need to talk about as well. But if there's any specifics, you guys feel free to let me know. Once again, if you enjoy my content, please do leave a like and a sub, and maybe even a comment for the algorithm. That stuff really does help a lot. I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing everybody ask for it, but it really does. We all got to fight for our food, you know. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. The plugs, as always, I stream on Twitch over at Twitch TV Physics. I'm Physics on every platform. Over on Twitter, I have a help channel in my Discord. Feel free to go in there, discuss build starters and stuff like that. I try to check the channel as much as I can. And yeah, you want to support me, feel free to join me in those channels. Feel free to sub, leave, you know, all that garbage we already went over. The link for this character's PoB as is right now will be down in the description. So feel free to check it out there and play around with it a little yourself. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.